Hi, I'm Dr. David Wallace. Greetings from the Hermitage Artist Retreat on Manasota Key, Florida. In this video, I will be sharing hints for performing Submerged, a wonderful new flute-viola-harp trio by Uruguayan-American composer Miguel del Aguila. This video is a companion to Let's Play Submerged, an article I wrote for the Journal of the American Viola Society. You'll find a link to that article in the video description. Submerged was commissioned by my flute-viola-harp trio Hat Trick with flutist April Clayton and harpist Kristi Shade. When Hat Trick was preparing to record Garden of Joys and Sorrows, our first CD, we knew that we wanted a commission. So we looked at a lot of composers and we wound up choosing Miguel for a number of reasons. For one thing, his chamber music is full of life and character and interest. There's always engaging melodies and really compelling, driving, engaging rhythms as well. Moreover, we knew from his pieces that his harp writing is exceptional, and that was really important to us. Miguel's music is fresh and modern, yet it's always accessible to audiences. Moreover, as a composer, Miguel often draws from his Latin American heritage and musical and cultural resources, and we knew that his unique voice as a composer would make a compelling, original, and much-needed contribution to the flute-viola-harp repertoire. One request we made of Miguel was to draw upon a poem as his inspiration. Miguel chose a dazzling poem by the Swiss-Argentinian poet Alfonsina Storni, Yo en el fondo del mar, or Me at the Bottom of the Sea. The trio that resulted is a tour de force that combines Andean traditional influences, haunting classical harmonies, compelling new extended techniques, birdsong, and dance. You can read more about Storni, her poem, and Miguel's interpretation of it in our album's liner notes, as well as in my Journal of the American Viola Society article linked in this video's description. Submerged did not disappoint. I really believe this is one of the new masterpieces for flute-viola-harp trio, and it is becoming widely played by many trios, and he has also adapted it for a number of combinations of instruments. According to Miguel, flutists really are the ones leading the charge in playing Submerged. And when Hat Trick performed Submerged for a new music showcase at the 2019 National Flute Association Conference, I was surprised at the number of flutists who came up to me and said, I would love to do that, but I don't know that I've got a violist who can do that or play that. And that actually surprised me because, to tell you the truth, for me, Submerged is one of the easiest pieces on our CD. It's one where once you know how to navigate the challenges and the difficulties, it just is there and it stays with you, and it doesn't take much to get it back into your brain and your fingers, and it is nothing but pure joy to play. So in this video, this is for you violists so that we can start leading the charge and getting flutists and harpists to join us in playing Submerged. All we need to know is a few secrets and approaches. Let's go into my studio and let's learn them. Okay, so let's play Submerged. The very first thing that we've got to wrap our heads around is the scordatura, or alternative tuning. You see, Miguel knew that the harp sounds the most beautiful and the most resonant when the pedals are in the flat position and the strings are looser rather than when they're tighter in the sharp position. So he wrote Submerged in A flat minor, 7 flats. Now, the good news is we don't have to play in 7 flats. We just have to tune our viola down a half step and we play it as though we're playing in A minor. The flute is not so lucky. Your flutist has to play in 7 flats. But, you know, they can do it. April does a great job. It's not a problem. And I'm thankful that I can just tune down and play. Admittedly, there are some challenges to playing tuned down a half step. I'm going to address the more psychological and mental and aural issues first, and then we'll deal with the practical issues second. It can be disorienting to play on an instrument tuned down a half step, even if you don't have absolute pitch, because you're playing a note and your ear expects to hear a D, but it comes out a D flat. It's a little disorienting. So the good news is it is something we can overcome. You just have to get used to it. You have to invest some time. Even if you have very strong absolute pitch, trust me, you can do it. Clarinetists do this all the time. Trumpet players do it all the time. Mozart did it. He had as good a perfect pitch as anybody, but he has us play the Sinfonia Concertante, tuning our violas up a half step, and it sounds great, and you should do that. But it takes some time. So what I'd say is retune, play some etudes and some things you know, play some scales, and just take some time to get used to it. It won't take as long as you might expect. And the good news is we don't have a visual disconnect because the part will still be written in C. And so mentally, all you got to do is say, well, I just need to think about a flat in front of all those pitches. So what you see on the page will correspond with what you're hearing, which isn't the case when you're tuning up for Mozart's Sinfonia Concertante. That causes a disconnect because you're reading something in D major and you're hearing it come out in E flat major. So thankfully, we don't have that adjustment to make. Another bit of good news is Miguel has us tuning down. So that means we're taking a little bit of tension and pressure away from the bridge. So it's not like tuning up where you might be concerned, is this extra pressure and extra tension going to cause some damage? The truth of the matter is it doesn't really loosen it enough to destabilize things. So I think on that front, we're a little bit safer. Again, if you've got an old Italian instrument and you're worried about changing tunings and it being fussy, then don't use that instrument for Submerged. Use a more modern instrument or use a less expensive instrument or something that you feel comfortable exploring different tunings. Different tunings are great. There are so many different works, and those of you who know the music of Kenji Bunch, different tunings all over the place. And so viola should get to know that music and be not afraid to explore that world. Now, there are some logistics to playing in a different key as well, and how you navigate that in concert is important. Those of you who have two violas could actually say, this is my submerged viola, and I will have it already tuned down a half step, ready to go. I just have this one viola, and so I tune it in concert. So I have to be strategic about that. Submerged is a great opener. It's also a great closer. It's also a great last piece before intermission. And so when Hat Trick performs Submerged, we perform it at a place in the concert where the tuning can be set and then there's time to readjust. So if we're playing it right before intermission, I get the tuning down, then right at intermission, I tune it back to normal tuning, and then I'm good to go to the second half. Or if we put it as the concert closer or as an encore, then it's simply the last piece, and then I can go back to standard tuning and adjust. In Hat Trick's beginning days, we did a lot more solos in duos. And if your trio does solos in duos, it might be great to have a flute and harp duo. You go off stage and retune, and that could happen either before Submerged or after Submerged. Now, if you're in the position of needing to retune on stage, which is often where I'm at because a lot of our concerts, we're just playing all trio all the time because that's what we like to do, I need time for the instrument to settle in. So I always tune twice. So if I'm needing to tune on stage in the middle of a concert, April Clayton, my flutist, turns to the audience, starts to introduce the piece, and usually she'll explain what I'm doing by retuning. And then I turn to Kristi Shade, and she gives me an A flat. Boy, that's a nice A flat. And I always have my instrument so that I can tune down to the A flat from a fine tuner. I get the A flat, maybe a D flat minor chord. And so I get that more or less, then I bring the... And just like that, I'm pretty close. However, we let April keep talking, I let the strings settle, and then we tune a second time, because it almost always happens that the strings adjust, and in the process of tuning the other strings and going to a different tuning, the strings stretch, settle, and it's still pretty good, you know, but it's always good to check, am I still with that? Yeah, it's pretty good. Let's see. And see the G's a little sharp to that? And in Florida, the extra humidity makes it a little harder to tune. So this is about as hard as it's going to be. And so that was maybe what, a couple minutes, but I'm tuned, I'm settled, and I'm ready to play Submerged. And tuning back when you're done is very straightforward. You can go off stage, you get your A from your tuner, and then you just get back to your normal pitch. That easy. And because your viola is used to being at that normal pitch, it's usually a quicker adjustment to go back to 440 or 442 or whatever you play at than it is to go down to the A flat. But still, if it's always good like to do this before intermission, tune immediately, reset, tune again before you go back on stage or when you go back on stage. And so for me, it's really not a problem. And this is a modern instrument by Alexander Tolchinsky. Hi, Alex. Thank you for my wonderful baby, made in 1991. The only viola I've owned and played, and it's been with me through a lot of life, and it's loved every minute, and so have I. And so, you know, I'll get the viola back in tune, and then maybe tune again when you go back on stage. And if you're putting the viola back in the case, please tune back to normal tuning. That way it'll be used to being back where it belongs. So now that we've navigated getting our instrument tuned down a half step, and we know how to do that, the next thing we need to do is to know how to strum like a charango. So Miguel drew from Andean folk music, and specifically the Andean flute as well as the charango. The charango is, as most of you probably know, an instrument that developed in South America. Traditionally, the body of it was an armadillo shell. More recently, the body of the instrument is wood. But it's an instrument with a very special sound and a unique quality. Most of the time, it is played only with the fingers and thumb, and there's strumming techniques as well as finger picking. I would highly recommend that you check out some videos so that you get a sense of what it looks like, what it sounds like. There's even a few instructional videos. And if you know a charango player or ask around for one, that would be a very helpful thing to have them walk you through a lesson and how to strum. And I will put a couple of links in the video description of some players. I particularly enjoyed watching Oscar Miranda as well as Jaime Torres. Lots of players out there, but just to get a feel for the instrument and a sense of the sound and the way that charanguistas play the instrument and how to get the strum. Something I love about what Miguel told me about the strumming is he said, it's not about the beauty of your sound. You are the entire percussion section. Just go for it. And that's really one of the joys of playing Submerged is you're driving the bus, you're driving the rhythm, and you're giving the foundation for the flutist to do these incredible licks and melodies and trading those with the harp. And you're the foundation. And so sometimes you are the one who gets to propel the groove. And honestly, that's not so different from playing viola in a Haydn quartet. We're the ones giving the groove and the rhythm and driving the bus. So in some ways, this is just an extension of the role you're used to having in chamber music. So to get the feel, I recommend just taking a simple chord and practicing the strum. Miguel says to play with the thumb on the downstroke and the index finger on the upstroke. As you watch charango players, you'll notice that the thumb in particular is parallel to the string and it's a firm downstroke. So down, and then on the up, the index finger curves up. One of the challenges is that our bridge is curved. Charangos and guitars, the strings are all parallel, but we're on a curve. It's not a big deal, it just makes things a little different. So, it's like, how you pivot your bow when you're playing to adjust to the strings. If I'm just going straight across the strings, that's not gonna feel super good to me, but I'm not going to roll in the same way as if I'm bowing. But there's this sense of this down and up. But the hand itself moves in arcs. Everything we do with our fingers, our wrists, our forearms makes arcs. And so I'm creating a strum that is curving through. So if you take your thumb, take your finger and just dum, chicka chicka 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 dum. Keeping my wrist loose, keeping my fingers loose. And then I think it's great just to practice a single chord. So you can play that A minor chord, which will come out as A flat minor. So I've got a, can you hear how resonant that is? Just like the harp, we're getting a better ring and a rounder, fuller sound. So it even sounds less like a plucked viola and more like a different instrument, like it's an alto charango or something. But here we have, so I'm going down. Another thing that will help you is if you're plucking over the fingerboard, as Miguel says, the further down you get in the fingerboard, the less curvature there is. And so that way, doing a straight up and down strum, it's not as hard as if you're bowing closer to the bridge, strumming closer to the bridge. So let's actually just try this. So I'm going down, down, up, down, up, down. And that's it. And it starts to be fun. So another pattern that happens, there's like an E chord, which comes out as E flat. Down, up, down, up, down. So I think it's good to take the rhythms, just focus on a single chord. Don't worry about changing the chords. I also need to tell you a story. When Miguel sent the score, he warned me, he says, don't go overboard on the pizzicato, practice gradually so that you can build up a callus and so that, otherwise you could get a blister. I saw that this was a special piece, that it was a real masterpiece, and I was so excited. I just strummed away until I got a blister. And then I kept strumming until the blister broke because I just loved the piece. I loved the concept. And then I spent the next week and a half mending, letting the skin reattach, and building a callus. Should have listened to the composer. When in doubt, listen to Miguel. But definitely build the callus gradually. These days at Berklee, I do so much strumming, accompanying students, that I keep a kind of a perpetual callus. But even if I don't play strum for a while, I'll work up gradually. If you're feeling the hot spot and feeling like you're on the verge of a blister, but you need to keep practicing or keep rehearsing with your trio, the good news is there's a workaround. I recommend getting either a felt ukulele pick or a thin guitar pick and use that to strum. It's harmless to the strings, and you can still practice the forearm and finger motion. It's not quite the same or quite the same sound, but it can keep you practicing and keep the group rehearsing without risking a blister. And then you just come back to it the next day, again, play until you feel like, okay, this is a hot spot, then revert to the plectrum. Now, I have actually heard performances where violists have used a felt ukulele pick for the whole performance. And it's possible, but don't do it. Because Miguel says, I want you to sound like a charango. And you will be hard pressed to find a charango player who uses a plectrum for strumming for the entire time. They may be out there, but I haven't found them, because the essence of charango is the finger strum and the finger picking. And so because of that, it's a different sound. It's not unlike bass players who play the electric bass with their fingers versus those who play with a pick. They're both effective, they both get a result, but it's an entirely different approach and different sound. And for the sound of the charango, we need skin, we need fingernails, and we need our hands. So just a case in point, I've got Jim Dunlop. It's actually a medium strength guitar pick, but it's pretty light. And I actually use it for the opening, as I'll show you in a minute. But I will strum with this. You can hear you can hear the plastic and the plectrum, which is very different from the thumb. Now, a felt ukulele pick will be a little softer, but still, use your fingers. You won't regret it. Another thing about strumming, generally I just stand, and I've got my shoulder rest here. I just kind of tuck it against my side and bring my arm down here. Everything feels secure, and then it's just like I'm strumming a guitar or a mandola, and it's easy. If you're more comfortable, you could always get a stool and ask to sit on a stool for performance, or if your trio performs from a chair, you can just sit on the chair. When I play seated on a stool, I'll generally put my right foot on a rung, and then I rest the bouts, the lower right bout, on my knee. And that gives me support. It also helps the instrument to be away from my belly, and so it rings a little more fully, but it's not a big issue. You can't pull, you can sort of do submerged in normal position, but I wouldn't. It's a lot more fun this way, and this angle, you can't use your thumb like a charango. So embrace the whole strumming experience. Strum with the viola on your knee or tucked in on your belly under your arm. The one place where I do use a plectrum is the opening. I told Miguel initially, I don't know that we can play that high up and have it speak, because it's kind of hard to get the string all the way down to the fingerboard. Well, I can do that just with the thumb. It's a little bit easier to get that with a pick. And then at that point, you can throw your pick out to the audience for a souvenir or drop it on your stand, but as soon as that's done, you've got just a breath to get back to. Also, a quick word before I leave those opening chords, or just chords in general. When we play, we've got this kind of curve, and our forearms are probably looking something like that. which results in this kind of approach to fingering where the fingers are coming at this angle. That's not an optimal angle for doing the kinds of fifths-based chords that Miguel writes. And so I'm going to supinate my forearm so that it's more pivoted this way and approach the fingerboard like this. So my fingers are more perpendicular to the strings. Why? Because that angle, I can stop the chords across, almost like when you see a guitarist play a bar chord. So for that opening, and by the way, the root note you need, those are where you have your harmonics. So you can find that opening even before, like even while your flutist is talking, you can find your harmonics, and then there you are. So you can find that even before the piece starts. It's not hard to start with that. I've never started with the wrong chord, even though it's all the way up there. It's so easy to find, and you can find it without people even noticing. But anyway, if I have this kind of angle, it's easier to stop the chords. Even down here with the A minor, I say A minor, of course it's A flat minor, but I'm still thinking A. So when I've got my finger positioned that way, it's much easier to play an in-tune fifth than if I were trying to approach it more like... See, it's just sharper. It's kind of weird. And again, if you haven't done much strumming, you need to get used to it. You know, just maybe play some, you know, play some Bach Berets, play some old Suzuki book tunes, play your Telemann concerto. It'll mess with your head a little bit because it's flatter and closer to Baroque pitch, but you know, just explore what it's like to play in this position and having a supinated form. It will become almost second nature, where you just think, okay, this is my strumming position, this is my arco position. And it becomes easier the more you do it. You don't even have to think about it. But that's how you get those chords in tune with no problem, with ease, every single time. And if you're thinking in chord shapes, you can even just walk them up the fingerboard. So even just taking that minor chord shape, or taking that E chord shape. So we've got a fifth, a sixth, and then another sixth. So you just start to get a feeling for the shape of major, minor, seventh chords and what the spacing is like in different parts of the fingerboard. So I can just even, okay, let's take like a D7 or D flat 7. Walk it down. And so look at what Miguel's shapes are. There's only a handful of them. Get to know them, get to know how they feel in different parts of the fingerboard, and then the intonation is just locked in. So practice strumming a little bit, moving things up and down the fingerboard, and once it becomes familiar, again, you don't even have to think about it. You know the shape, you know the spacing in different parts of the fingerboard, and it'll just be there. I wanted to share one more thing in Miguel's notes where he said it's okay to, at liberty, add the sound of the string against the fingerboard. Where that came from was I more or less was telling Miguel that I think it's almost inevitable that we're going to get some fingerboard slap of the string just with all the strumming, and did he mind that? And he said, no, that would be okay. You could sort of do that to taste. It'd be especially strong on the offbeats. So in the strumming, if you practice very carefully, you can be pretty clean, but you could hear even on some of them, the thumb was picking up a little bit of that. You get less of that if you're further away from the fingerboard and closer to the bridge. So if I'm strumming here, but still sometimes I'm getting it on the harder strums, and that was actually the D string that was the culprit. So when that happens, or if that happens, you can kind of embrace it. Just and the other thing is, if I'm doing more that kind of strum, that's where I'm going to get more of it. If I'm doing more of an across strum, I will get less of it. And so sometimes I find the fingerboard timbre adding a little bit of a bright overtone adds a little more pop in the louder sections or the parts that are more agitated. Now I want to talk about another challenge that Miguel and I had to negotiate. There's passages where we're louder and we're to get more of a thumbnail kind of sound, because this is something that happens in charango playing. It doesn't work so well on viola. We have to have short nails just in order to use our bow and the fingerboard, so we don't typically have the ability to grow out long nails like guitarists. And I've tried. You know, when I first got the piece, it's like, okay, I'm going to have to get used to having a long thumbnail, and I'll just have a longer thumbnail that I use for plucking things. Right now, my thumbnail is about as long as it gets. You can see that's pretty long. I mean, for a violist, that's a pretty long thumbnail. The challenge is for a thumbnail, see? I just kind of tore it a little bit. Because we've got thicker strings. We've got tenser strings than a charango, or even a classical guitar with nylon strings. And our thumbnail can't take that counter pressure. Also, unlike a charango or unlike a guitar, we've got a curved bridge, which makes added challenges with plucking with the thumbnail. But fear not, I was able to work out a solution. I ran it by Miguel and he was totally cool with it. I said, you know what? I can take my index finger and I can kind of turn that into a plectrum effect where, and again, this is not a super long index fingernail, but what I do is I make the same kind of shape as if I'm holding like a guitar pick, you know, where I've got my thumb and the pick is there. But the difference is it's like I've got an imaginary pick here, and then I use my fingernail as the pick. So when I'm coming down on the string, I'm coming down with the fingernail of the index finger. Listen to that. So I've got the same kind of thumbnail effect, but using the index finger nail. And on the way up, I'm mostly just using the tip of the finger. So I'm using right here, the very tip, the calloused part just beyond the bone. And so it gets the same sort of crisp tone. It's a little less crisp than the downstroke with the fingernail, but it still sounds very different. It's a little harder, and there we go. That's a little better. And I'm also, if you noticed, I'm moving closer to the bridge to get more of a piercing kind of crisp, articulate plectrum sort of sound. And the other thing is, when I do this, when I make this kind of fingernail fake plectrum, I'm pretty firm with the grip, and this is fairly stiff. I mean, I'm not straightening it, but it's resistant. When I'm doing the charango strung, my fingers are pretty pliable and able to have this loose kind of strumming effect that you get from the great charango players. For this, I'm keeping it firm, so it's almost like it's a plectrum in itself, or like the quill of a harpsichord that just is very firm. So here's a little bit of the using the thumb's fingernail effect using the index finger plectrum method. It's a method now. Working up a sweat. Woo! So just want to point out a couple of things about that passage. I was playing from bar 51 all the way to bar 87. That last chord I actually played with my thumb. I rolled it. So that's one way to get a little more ring to that chord if you want to. You can still do it with the back of the fingernail to get more of that crisp plectrum sound. A lot of times I just leave it up to the moment, how Kristi's sounding, how I'm feeling, and what I think will be best. I want to point out a couple of details about the strum pattern as well. So we have these, I'm choking the sound to clear it so it doesn't ring. I release the left hand and then there's silence. I do that on some of the A chords. And there I'm stopping it with my left hand. And it's a way to clear the air and make the rhythm clear. In bar 77, there's a little bit of a change where we've got, so we've got accent, accent, accent. So again, just practice it on a chord, and just really kick that accent. And I'm doing a little bit of an arc this way, and that really gets that accent to pop. So really make a difference between the bars that have that extra accent and the bars that don't. And while it's not a charango kind of playing, there is another pizzicato passage I want to point out, which is he asks for a sul ponticello pizzicato, which sounds a little bit more like a guitar playing by the bridge, but and so if we pluck, it doesn't have to be right on the bridge, but if we're beyond the fingerboard, we get this, the sound is a little bit more mid-rangey and hollow, and it disappears really quickly. And that whole time, to make it sound like a charango or a Latin Spanish guitarist, subdivide the whole time. So I'm not thinking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7, 8, 9. I'm thinking and then every single note is full of life because it has a middle. And it's a quick change there, so I go, and then I'm already into plectrum mode, wrist comes up, and so, and practice that switch over, because that transition, if you're not used to doing this stuff, it takes a little getting used to, but you know, practice the transition from thumb to fingernail, and it just happens. So I've almost covered all the materials you need to know for the A section of the piece, which also comes back at the end. One last simple thing, which is you see in bar 36, 37, and 38, he has the instruction, knock on corner of instrument with right hand knuckles. And you're doing this knocking at the same time that the harp is knocking on her instrument. Now, harp, by virtue of its size and the resonating body of the harp, it's going to sound with a lot more body. It's going to be bassier. And so what we need to do in order to pop out and to hold our own against wrapping the harp is to find a spot that's going to be the brightest possible tone you can. For me, knocking around my instrument, ooh, see? Getting different sounds just depending on where I am. But for me, the sweet spot is this corner right here. Beautiful. And I also feel like it's safe. There's different, I mean, I know some of you are like, knock on my viola? Oh, not, are you kidding me? Do you know how much I paid for this thing? I don't want to know how much you paid for that thing. If you're not comfortable knocking, don't knock on that instrument. Get an instrument that you're comfortable knocking on, rent one, borrow one, or have your viola that you're happy playing in summer in the hot sun doing a wedding gig. But again, for me, I'm just lightly tapping in the corner. And it doesn't do any damage, it doesn't cause any risk, and I'm not knocking that hard. I mean, if I'm knocking on my forehead, it's just barely even touching the skin. I don't even get to the bone or the wood or whatever's inside here. So it's not a big deal. If you want it, if you're really nervous, you could try the chin rest. That's a pretty good spot on my chin rest. So if you absolutely will never knock on your instrument, would you knock on your chin rest? Try that one out. And again, I'm applying very little force. So that's the knocking part. So now let's talk about navigating the underwater part. The middle section of the piece, Miguel really kind of explores this underwater sound world of Alfonsina Storni's poem. And you know how it sounds like when you're underwater and you hear sounds coming to you from above the water, whether it's bird calls or airplanes or even people's voices. It's a little bit murky, it's a little distorted. But also everything looks different underwater. And so there's this kind of sense of this dream world underwater and this sense of hearing nature through this filter. And for this part, the harp plays this arpeggio and you and your flutist exit and are off stage. Off stage, you need to have your bow. You're also going to need a guitar pick. And for this, it's to simulate a bird call behind the bridge. I recommend using a fairly thin pick, but for me, a harder gauge pick tends to work better. It's got to be thin, but you know, going behind the bridge, that's the sound that we're going for, just kind of a bird. And that's all there is to it. You just run the pick over the strings. I'm not even adding pressure because you don't have to. And that's your bird. That will come a little bit later. The first thing that we do is we play this murky kind of tremolo entering over a harp melody. For that part, when Miguel first listened to a rehearsal recording, he gave me the instruction that it could be much more of a glissando kind of effect. He wasn't so much concerned about precise changes of the pitch, but it's all this kind of murky, almost like seaweed underwater, just how it bends in the waves. Sol ponticello. And so to make it less precise of here's the note in the note, I'm just using a couple of fingers and glissandoing them to get that blurry effect. I'm still trying to get the pitches that he writes. And for me, this was actually the one part of the piece where my ear gave me the most trouble because I was hearing notes that in my head and the pitches in my head, but they weren't quite where I'm used to them being. But again, if you sing it first, get the part in your voice, get it in your ear, then your ear can help you find it. Also, because we're going for this blurry underwater effect, if you slide in and out to the pitches a little bit, that's kind of in keeping of the piece. So when we're in off stage, one of the first things you see is a quick gliss over open A string harmonics. Do not stay on the first or last note. Pitches and length of glisses are approximate. So all he wants you to do is go way up, put your bow by the bridge, and do a little tiny caress of the string over the harmonics, and it's going to give you a little bird call. And explore it until you find a call that you really like. That's a nice one. So you and the flute are alternating bird calls. And that's where, alternating with that, the plectrum comes in. Now, it really is such that you don't really have enough time to put the bow down, put the plectrum up, and then pick the bow back up. So usually what I do is when I go off stage, I do something unorthodox. I'm holding my bow more like a club. Because in order to just do the bird call, I just need a tiny amount of bow, and so I don't have to be super careful about how I'm holding the bow. I just have to do a light little thing, and then I'm holding the plectrum here with my thumb and forefinger. So I've got the bird call here. And again, just a little caress of the strings, and so I can go. And again, I'm doing all down. And then we've got this little birdie where we've got, so in the score he's got an open harmonic, just putting your third finger down on a C. And then he's got putting your second finger down on an E, just a minor third. You can get that same harmonic playing the E, playing an A, and for me that's easier, and then I alternate strings, so I've been, and again, I'm still playing more or less with the club. I've kind of put my thumb more on the bottom, but, and then we switch to a woodpecker effect. We're using the screw, the nook of the bow, to play on the tailpiece. If you want, you can actually move up and down and change the pitch. You know, you can find where is the most woodpeckery sound on your tailpiece. That sounds a little more metallic. That sounds a little too bright. There's the woodpecker. Here's another thing. If you're like, I don't want to mess with my tailpiece, that messes with the strings, could get them out of tune, relax. The chin rest once again to the rescue. Oh, that's nice. So explore different sounds. There are solutions. I go ahead and use my tailpiece because that seems to be the most reliable and gets it for me. And I'm not using any force at all. It's just a tap. So that's the woodpecker effect. One last thing I will say about this section is that Hat Trick has a rule, and that rule is no faking, ever. Play the notes, play the rhythms. So when April and I put this together, we were trying to make sure that our polyrhythmic triplets were just so, that we were alternating exactly right. And Miguel said, you know, you guys sound a little bit mechanical and a little bit robotic. You're birds. I want the alternation, but the rhythms are kind of an approximation. And so there's a little bit of freedom with that. However, later at measure 160, we're about to transition back on stage. And for those reactions to the harpist, we need to line up our notes with our harpist. That is more back to strict time. So you can be a little bit freer in the bird call and woodpecker section, but as soon as you get to bar 160, back to being strict. 1, 2, 1, 2. And so you're alternating with the harp. So respond to your harpist. And then you leave your plectrum and your bow backstage. You're going to come back on stage, and he asked to play with the fingernail behind the bridge. And for that, sometimes I will use my index finger, but more often that's where I will use my thumb fingernail. And so you just hook the string. and you're walking back on stage. So, 2 music stands, one on stage, one off. The offstage part only needs the submerged middle section. The on stage, you need the beginning and the end and everything up to where you walk off stage. You need an offstage plectrum for the behind the bridge bird calls. You need an onstage plectrum if you're going to play the opening with a plectrum. Sometimes if I have a pocket, I'll just tuck it right in there. And you need your bow off stage for that, or if you're actually doing that one submerged part before you walk off stage, then you take the bow with you and you can leave it off stage. So that's my advice for performing and practicing Submerged by Miguel del Aguila. And if you have questions or tips of your own to share, please list them in the comment section below. I should also mention that Hat Trick's CD, which premiered Submerged, received a 2018 Grammy nod as one of 9 projects that earned producer David Frost the Producer of the Year Classical Grammy. I also just wanted to send a shout out and thank you to everybody at the Hermitage Artist Retreat. I, out of the blue, got an invitation to be a 22 to 24 Hermitage Fellow, which means I get to spend some time at this beautiful retreat in Florida to create, to compose, and do some new music. And this really gave me the chance to create this video, which will help a lot more violists to navigate and perform Submerged. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I also want to thank Brigham Young University, where April Clayton, my flutist, was a professor for many years, because they gave April a generous grant which helped us to fund the commission for Submerged. So thank you, BYU. I'm very happy to announce that this November, Hat Trick is going back in the studio to record our next CD. We will be premiering a new piece that we have commissioned, Big Sky, from composer Daniel Dorff. It is just gorgeous. Wait till you hear it. We will also be recording Angelica Negron's Drawings for Mayoko, which was first recorded, commissioned, and premiered by Janus, the Janus Trio, a really great flute-viola-harp trio that has commissioned a lot of wonderful new works, including that one. We will be doing Arnold Bax's classic Elegiac Trio, which is a very British romantic piece, just gorgeous, and kind of the same time that Debussy wrote his sonata. There will be some other first-time ever recordings and a number of surprises. We will keep you posted. So happy strumming, everybody. Stay tuned.